I booked the Airbnb because it looked simple and cheap, and I needed a place to stay for 3 nights while visiting someone I knew in the area. The house was a small single-bedroom unit attached to the side of a larger home. The listing photos made it look modern and clean. The host wrote that the guest unit had its own entrance on the side of the house, and I wouldn't have to interact with anyone. That sounded perfect to me. I like being alone. I like not having to deal with anyone when I'm traveling. At the time, I didn't even think about how that could be a bad thing. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was sinking low behind the neighborhood rooftops. The street was quiet, with most houses lined up neatly, the kind of place where people water their lawns early in the morning and keep their trash bins perfectly aligned. The main house looked normal enough. Gray siding, white trim, a small porch light. The guest entrance was down a narrow concrete path along the side, separated from the main yard by a tall wooden fence. The moment I stepped behind that fence, the noise of the neighborhood seemed to disappear. It felt oddly closed off, like I had walked into a pocket of silence that didn't belong in a suburban area. The door to the guest unit opened easily when I typed in the code the host provided. Inside, the air felt stale, like no one had lived there for a long time. I dragged my bag inside and closed the door behind me. The living area was small, with a couch, a coffee table, a wall-mounted TV, and a little kitchenette tucked into the corner. The bedroom was off to the right, barely big enough for a queen bed and a nightstand. The bathroom was clean but cold, with thin towels that looked like they'd been washed too many times. I went around checking everything, trying to get rid of that strange feeling that the place was missing something. Everything looked normal, but it felt too empty, like someone cleaned the space in a rush and left an hour before I arrived. The trash can was completely spotless. The bed looked almost too perfectly made. The fridge had only a few bottles of water inside, arranged neatly in a row. The closet in the bedroom had no hangers, no spare blankets, nothing except a small step stool on the floor. It felt like a show home instead of a place where guests stay. I unpacked a bit, took a shower, and sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. For the first hour, everything felt fine. The place was quiet, and I tried to relax, but the silence was different from hotel silence. It felt less like peaceful quiet and more like the kind that comes from someone holding their breath behind a wall. I didn't know why the thought hit me, but it sank into my chest and stayed there. Later in the evening, as I walked past the bathroom, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The bathroom mirror had a faint streak across it. Not like it was dirty, but like someone had pressed their finger along the side and dragged it down. The streak wasn't part of the moisture from my earlier shower. It was slightly darker, as if oily skin had touched the glass. I wiped it with a towel, trying to brush it off as a leftover mark the cleaning crew missed. But I knew what I saw. I tried to push the idea out of my mind. People miss spots. Housekeepers get tired. It didn't mean anything was wrong. I sat on the couch and tried to distract myself with the TV, but the remote was dead. When I opened the kitchen drawer to look for batteries, I froze. Inside the drawer, mixed in with the utensils, was a single key. A long silver key with a white tag tied to it. The tag had a room number written on it in faded marker. 2B. That made no sense. This wasn't an apartment building. There were no numbered rooms. There was the main house and this small guest unit. I placed the key back in the drawer, closed it slowly, and stood in the middle of the living room trying to breathe calmly. Maybe the key belonged to the host and they forgot it. Maybe it had nothing to do with this place. But the tag looked too worn, like it had been used often. I didn't feel comfortable anymore. I didn't say anything out loud, but my mind kept racing. I turned on all the lights in the unit, every single one. The space felt small but bright, and I wanted it that way. I didn't want a single dark corner in that place. I tried to stay awake by scrolling through my phone, but my eyelids grew heavy around midnight. I decided to sleep on the couch instead of the bedroom. It felt safer somehow, being closer to the front door. I lay on the couch wrapped in a blanket, trying to sleep with the TV left on mute for some background light. For a long time, nothing happened. I started to drift. The kind of light sleep where your mind floats but your body stays alert. Then I heard it, a soft shift of weight, not inside the guest unit but above it. Directly above me, a quiet, heavy creak from the ceiling, like a person settling their foot on a wooden floor. There was no second story above the guest unit. It had a slanted roof with no attic. I knew that because I looked at the listing photos earlier. The main house had a second floor, but it wasn't supposed to extend over this part of the property. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling. Another soft creak followed. Slow. Paused. Then another. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone was up there moving carefully. They weren't walking casually. They were trying not to be heard. Every hair on my arms stood straight up. I didn't move. Not even a breath too sharp. I just stared at the ceiling as the quiet creaks shifted from one side to the other. For minutes, maybe longer. Eventually, the sounds stopped. I didn't sleep at all after that. When dawn finally came, I got up from the couch slowly. My body ached from staying in the same tense position all night. The unit looked the same, but everything felt different. I packed my bag immediately. I didn't even shower or brush my teeth. I just shoved my clothes into my suitcase, zipped it up, and moved toward the door. Before leaving, I checked the closets and corners, making sure nothing had been moved. Everything looked untouched except one thing. The bathroom mirror had a new streak on it, faint but fresh, lower than the one from last night, like someone shorter had touched it this time. My chest went hollow. My body turned warm with panic. I grabbed my bag and left so fast I almost tripped on the concrete path. When I reached my car, I threw everything into the back seat without caring how it landed. As I drove away, I couldn't stop looking in my rearview mirror. The side of the house looked normal. No movement, no shadows, nothing to prove what I suspected. But the quiet street felt wrong. Too still for a place with people living so close together. I drove to a nearby plaza and sat in my car shaking. My mind went back through every detail. The stale smell, the spotless trash can, the faint warmth in certain spots, the key in the drawer, the creaks above me. And then the mirror. Both streaks were too deliberate, too clean, too intentional. Someone had been inside the unit with me. Not a ghost. Not a noise from a pipe or an animal. A real person. Someone with access to the property. Someone who moved quietly through the walls or ceiling, knowing exactly how not to be heard. Someone who entered when guests weren't looking and stayed hidden to watch them. Someone who left small marks, not accidents but reminders. The ending became painfully clear the more I thought about it. The guest unit wasn't separate at all. The walls or the ceiling had an access point from the main house, probably something hidden behind a closet or a panel I didn't notice. The host wasn't giving guests privacy. The host or someone living with them was watching, maybe recording, maybe waiting for a moment when a guest slept deeply enough. I left before that moment could happen. If I had stayed longer, if I had fallen asleep harder, I don't think I would have woken up in the same room I booked. I don't think I would have woken up with my belongings still where I left them. Maybe I wouldn't have woken up at all. I didn't leave a review. I didn't message the host. I just left the town completely, and I never stayed in a place with a private entrance again. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to finish a project. The listing showed a small guest house behind a family home. Nothing fancy, just a clean room, a mini kitchen, and a bathroom. The price was low, and the reviews mentioned that the area was peaceful. That was exactly what I wanted. I thought I'd spend most of the time writing, maybe take short walks in the neighborhood, and leave after 2 nights. When I arrived, the street looked normal enough, but something about it felt off. It was too empty for a residential area. No kids playing outside, no cars moving up or down the road, no dogs barking from yards. Every house had drawn curtains or blinds. It was early evening, but it felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I brushed off the feeling, telling myself I was tired after the long drive. The guest house looked simple. A single-level structure with old siding, a small porch, and a single window facing the yard. The host had left the door unlocked for easier check-in, according to the message. When I stepped inside, the air was colder than outside. Not fresh cold, but stale cold, like a basement that hadn't been opened in a long time. The room was small but neat. A bed against the wall under the window, a small table with a wooden chair, a kitchenette with a microwave and fridge, and a bathroom door on the right side. Everything looked clean, but the air felt heavy in my nose and throat. It reminded me of storage units, the kind of smell that comes from things sitting untouched. I walked around, touching things to get a sense of the place. The table felt slightly sticky, even though it looked wiped. The fridge hummed too loudly for such a small space. When I checked the bathroom, the mirror was fogged at the bottom, not from steam but from age. The light above the sink flickered softly when it first turned on. I tried to settle in. I put my bag on the bed, plugged in my laptop, and sat at the table. But after a few minutes, I realized I could hear something inside the walls. First, I thought it was pipes. A low, irregular knocking sound that moved from one corner of the room to the other. Not constant, but enough to distract me. I ignored it as best as I could and focused on my work. As the sun went down, the room's atmosphere changed. The walls looked darker even with the lights on. The air felt colder again, and I noticed a faint draft near the floor, especially around the bottom of the bathroom door. I sat on the bed for a moment to rest my eyes, but when I glanced at the bathroom door, I froze. The door was slightly open. I knew I closed it earlier after checking the bathroom. Not locked, but fully shut. Now it was open just an inch or two, enough to see the thin line of darkness inside. I waited, watching the door for any movement. Nothing happened. I told myself maybe the draft pushed it open, or maybe the floor wasn't even. But the feeling that someone had stepped inside while I wasn't looking made my skin crawl. I got up, pushed the door closed again, and sat back down. I kept glancing toward it while pretending to work. The knocking in the walls continued, and now there was a faint rustling sound above the ceiling. I assumed animals were messing around in the attic. That thought actually helped me feel better. Animals made sense. Animals explained noise. Around midnight, I tried to sleep. I left one of the small lamps on because the room felt too dark without it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the strange sounds. The knocking felt slower now, but every once in a while, I heard a soft thud from somewhere near the bathroom. The floor gave a tiny vibration with each noise, like something heavy shifting behind a wall. I eventually fell asleep, but I woke up suddenly sometime later. My throat felt dry, and something felt wrong. The lamp was still on, casting a warm glow across the room, but the far corner near the bathroom looked darker than it should have. I sat up slowly. The bathroom door was open again. Not slightly this time, fully open. The darkness inside looked thick, like a place without any reflective surfaces. I stared at it, unable to breathe for a few seconds. I felt a cold wave spread across my chest. I tried to convince myself that maybe the door didn't latch properly. Maybe the hinge was loose. As I stared, something else caught my attention. The rug near the bathroom door was wrinkled, like someone had stepped on it or dragged their foot across it. I hadn't touched the rug since arriving. It had been flat all evening. I stayed awake until morning, sitting upright in the bed, watching the bathroom doorway. I felt too scared to get up and close the door again. Every noise from inside the walls felt louder during those hours. Slow taps, soft scraping, a low thump every now and then. I didn't sleep again. When the sun finally rose and lit up the room, I felt a small sense of relief, like the daylight pushed the heaviness away for a while. I got out of bed, walked carefully to the bathroom, and checked everything again. Nothing looked out of place, but the air inside smelled slightly sour, like someone had been sweating in a closed room. I washed my face, trying to snap out of the fear I'd built in my head. But when I left the bathroom, I noticed something that made me stop cold. The wooden chair at the table had been moved. It was pulled back from the table just enough for someone to sit in it. I knew for a fact I left it tucked in before going to bed. I stared at it for a long time, trying to think of any explanation. Maybe I bumped it earlier? Maybe I was half asleep and didn't remember? But the angle was too exact, too deliberate. I decided right then I wouldn't stay another night. I packed my things quickly, stuffing everything into my bag without organizing it. I kept looking over my shoulder, especially toward the bathroom. The air felt wrong again, still and heavy, like the room was waiting for me to make a mistake and stay longer. Before leaving, I checked under the bed out of paranoia. There was nothing, just dust and an old screw lying near the wall. I grabbed my bag, turned off the lights, and stepped out of the guest house into the cold morning air. As I walked around the side of the building toward the driveway, something caught my eye near the guest house window. The blinds inside were slightly bent upward, as if someone had lifted them with a finger to look outside. The angle was small but noticeable. I hadn't touched the blinds since arriving. I stared at that window for a few seconds before forcing myself to keep walking. I got into my car and drove away without looking back. I didn't even message the host until hours later. I told them the place didn't feel safe and that I left early. I didn't give details. I didn't want to explain the noises, the moving door, the chair, or the blinds. I didn't want to sound like I was making things up. But the worst part came the next day, when a message from the host arrived. It said they were sorry I felt uncomfortable, but the guest house had been empty for weeks, and they hadn't been inside since putting out fresh towels earlier that morning. That meant nobody had come in after I arrived. Nobody had stepped inside during the night, but something had still moved the door. Something had still moved the chair. Something had still lifted those blinds to look out. And the sounds inside the walls weren't old pipes. They weren't animals. They were heavy, slow, deliberate movements, the kind that come from a person trying not to be heard. I will never know if someone had found a way into that attic or wall space before I arrived. I will never know how close they were to stepping out in the middle of the night. And I will never know if they were watching me through the blinds while I loaded my bag into the car. But I know one thing for sure. Leaving that morning wasn't just a decision. It was the only thing that kept me from finding out what else was inside that guest house, waiting for the lights to go out again. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, close to the small town I needed to visit, and had a long list of good reviews. Nothing about it looked strange at first. There were a few photos showing a simple one-floor house with a long driveway and a small porch. The inside looked plain but clean. I didn't think much about it. I just needed a place to sleep for 2 nights. I reached the house late in the afternoon after a long drive. My legs felt stiff from sitting for hours, and all I wanted was to stretch out and rest. The house was a little farther from the main road than I expected. The driveway felt longer in person than it looked in the photos, and the trees on both sides were tall and dense, blocking the view of the road behind me. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt cooler and more still than I expected. It was the kind of stillness that made the place feel cut off from the rest of the world. When I entered, the house had that slightly dusty smell that old houses have when no one has stayed in them for a few days. I walked around and checked each room, just to get familiar with the layout. The living room was small, with an old brown couch and a wooden coffee table. The kitchen was basic, with a fridge that hummed louder than normal. The bedroom was at the far end of the house, and there was a small office room beside it. At first, everything looked normal, but when I went back toward the living room, I noticed something strange. The small office room next to the bedroom had a door that was slightly open. I remembered closing it earlier when I first checked the house. I wasn't sure if I had maybe left it like that without realizing, but it bothered me. The gap was thin, but wide enough to show darkness inside. I pushed it shut again and tried to ignore how uneasy that little detail made me feel. I unpacked a few things, washed my face, and decided to rest for a while. The house felt quieter than most places, not even the usual sounds of cars in the distance. Then I heard a soft creak. It sounded like a floorboard bending under pressure. At first I thought it was the house settling, but the sound felt too sharp, like someone had stepped somewhere. I stood still for a while and listened. Nothing, just the fridge humming again. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overthinking. An hour later, I decided to make some food. As I walked past the small office again, the door was open slightly. Again, I was sure I had closed it properly this time. A light, cold feeling spread through my stomach. I told myself maybe the door frame was loose or the house wasn't leveled right, causing the door to slide. Old houses do stuff like that. But still, I pushed it completely shut again, even testing it twice to make sure it clicked. That night, I tried to sleep around midnight. The house felt colder than before, even though the weather wasn't that chilly. I could hear faint cracks and pops from the wooden interior, but old houses always make those noises. I lay in bed for a long time, waiting for my body to settle. When I almost drifted off, I heard another sound. This time, it wasn't the fridge or the normal noises. It came from the hallway. Slow, careful, like someone shifting their weight on old wooden floorboards. My heartbeat picked up fast. I stared at the dark ceiling, trying to breathe quietly. The sound didn't continue, but the memory of that office door being open over and over again kept running circles in my mind. I finally got up and walked into the hallway with my phone light. The hallway looked empty, nothing out of place. But when I pointed the light toward the office, the door was half open again. I felt my skin crawl. I didn't even walk closer this time. I just shut the bedroom door and dragged my suitcase in front of it. Not because I thought it would stop anything serious, but because it gave me some peace of mind. I eventually fell asleep from pure exhaustion. In the morning, sunlight made everything look normal again. I even felt embarrassed about how scared I had become the night before. I pushed the suitcase aside and opened the bedroom door slowly. The hallway was quiet and empty. I checked the office again. The door was closed this time, completely shut. I left it alone. I spent most of the day outside, just driving around town and trying to stay out until late in the evening. I didn't want to spend unnecessary time inside the house. Something about the place made me feel watched, even when I knew I was alone. When I returned around sunset, I noticed something that froze me in place. The curtain in the living room had been moved. Not much, just a small shift, like someone had pushed it aside to peek outside. I knew for a fact it hadn't looked like that when I left. The living room window was the only one in the house without blinds, just thin curtains. The shift was tiny but noticeable. I checked the door lock. It looked untouched. I checked the windows, all locked from the inside. I checked the back door, locked too. Maybe I was paranoid, or maybe I had brushed past the curtain earlier without realizing. I tried to convince myself that was the case. Night came again, and I couldn't help but feel tense. Every little sound made me alert. Around 1 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was the distinct sound of movement inside the walls. Not rats or small animals, but heavier, slower movement like someone crawling or shifting their body weight. The sound came from the wall behind the office room. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, trying to understand what I was hearing. The noise continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. Then another creak came from the hallway, soft but sharp enough that I knew it wasn't the house naturally settling. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and my shoes. I didn't even pack everything properly. I opened the bedroom door and walked into the hallway as quietly as possible. My phone flashlight shook slightly in my hand. The office door was open. This time it was wide open. A cold, empty feeling filled my chest. I didn't even look inside. Something in me refused to let my eyes go toward that darkness. I just walked straight past it with fast, careful steps. When I reached the living room, something on the floor caught my eye. A bottle cap. A random plastic bottle cap that wasn't there before. I hadn't brought any bottled drinks. I hadn't seen it yesterday or earlier today. It looked like it had rolled out from somewhere. Maybe from under the couch. Maybe from the far corner of the living room. My mind was racing in every direction. I unlocked the front door and stepped out into the cold night air, feeling like I had been holding my breath the whole time. I walked fast toward my car. As I reached the driver's side, I made the mistake of glancing back at the house. The curtain in the living room moved. Not from wind, not from some draft. It moved as if someone inside had let it fall back into place after peeking out. I didn't wait another second. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove out of the property so fast I almost hit the mailbox at the end of the driveway. I drove straight to a gas station and parked under all the bright lights. My hands were shaking as I sat there. I didn't know if I had imagined parts of it, if someone had actually been inside the walls, or if the place had some hidden crawl space no one mentioned. But everything pointed to one thing. Someone had been living inside the house, hiding, watching, moving quietly when they thought I couldn't hear. I texted the host and told them I was leaving early. I didn't explain why. I didn't want to get into details or deal with questions. I just wanted distance between me and that house. I didn't sleep until sunrise. The next morning, I drove home without going back to collect the rest of my things. Losing a few clothes and chargers felt like nothing compared to the thought of stepping into that house again. Later that week, I checked the Airbnb listing out of curiosity. The host had removed it. The entire posting was gone. That told me everything I needed to know. Something was wrong with that place, and I'm just glad I left when I did. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the small coastal town I wanted to explore. The place looked simple in the photos, nothing fancy, but clean enough for a short stay. It was a small one-bedroom unit attached to the owner's house, separated by a narrow hallway that had 2 locked doors facing each other. One door led to my side and the other to the host's. The host seemed normal in his profile picture. His description said he rented out the place to help pay bills, and that the unit was private except for occasional checks for maintenance. At the time, I didn't think much about that line. I just wanted a quiet place to sleep. The moment I arrived, I noticed the silence. The area felt empty even though I could see a few houses down the road. There were no kids playing, no dogs barking, no cars passing. Just still air and the sound of waves crashing somewhere far behind the property. The host wasn't outside when I got there, but the door to the unit was unlocked, and the keys were left on a small table inside. The place smelled slightly like dust and something metallic, like old tools. I didn't see anything wrong, so I carried my bag in and started to settle. The layout was simple. A small living area with thin curtains that barely blocked the light, a cramped kitchen with mismatched cabinets, a bathroom with low water pressure, and a bedroom that felt colder than the rest of the unit. The bed was pushed against the wall, and the mattress dipped slightly in the middle as if someone heavy slept there often. I tried not to focus on that. I unpacked and told myself it was only 2 nights. That first night, I noticed something strange around midnight. I had turned off all the lights and was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to sleep. The walls were thin, and I could hear small sounds from the host's side of the hallway. I wasn't sure what the noises were, but they were slow and steady, almost like careful footsteps, except they didn't move. It was more like someone standing still and shifting their weight now and then. Every time I thought the sound stopped, it started again. Kept going until I finally fell asleep out of pure exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, the air inside the unit felt different, warmer, almost like someone had been inside just a few minutes before I got up. I checked the door even though I knew I had locked it. The lock was turned the opposite direction. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had done it half asleep, maybe I had confused it somehow, but the thought sat heavy in my mind. I opened my duffel bag and saw that one of my shirts was folded differently than how I normally fold my clothes. The shirt was moved underneath another piece of clothing that I remembered leaving on top. It bothered me in a slow, creeping way, but I still tried to explain it as me being tired when I unpacked. I went out most of the day, hoping sunlight and distraction would get rid of the uneasy feeling. When I returned in the late afternoon, the air inside the unit felt colder, like the windows had been open, except they were all shut tightly. Nothing looked obviously touched, so I tried to relax. I made some food in the kitchen, sat at the small table, and ate in silence. While I ate, I kept thinking I heard faint movement on the host's side of the wall. Slow, dragging footsteps, something brushing the wall lightly. I tried to ignore it. That night was worse. I locked the door carefully, checked it twice, and pushed a chair under the handle just to feel safer. I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and lay down. It was quiet for a while. Then, a new sound started. Something soft and light tapping along the hallway wall outside the bedroom. It wasn't fast or aggressive, just slow, spaced out taps, like someone dragging their fingers and letting them hit the wall at intervals. Every hair on my body stood up. The tapping moved toward the area where the 2 opposing doors faced each other. My heart started beating so hard I could feel the pressure in my throat. I stayed completely still. I didn't move a muscle. The tapping stopped, but then I heard a quick metallic clicking sound from my side of the hallway. Not loud, but sharp enough to know exactly what it was. Someone was testing my door handle from the outside. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I stared at the ceiling and tried to make my breathing silent. The handle didn't move fully, probably because of the chair I placed under it. The clicking stopped, and then there was nothing. No footsteps walking away. No sound of retreat. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I must have lain awake for hours. Eventually, when the faint blue light of dawn touched the curtains, I finally felt brave enough to get up. My whole body was stiff from staying in one position too long. The chair was still in place under the door handle, but slightly angled as if pushed gently. The lock was still turned correctly, but the air in the room felt disturbed again, like someone had been right on the other side of the door for a long time. I knew I needed to leave. I didn't want to spend another night there. I packed my stuff fast, stuffing everything into my bag without caring how messy it was. When I stepped outside the unit, I looked at the hallway. The host's door was open just a crack. I couldn't see inside, but the gap was wide enough to show darkness and a faint smell of sweat and dust coming out. I didn't want to look too closely. I just forced myself to walk out the front entrance and get to my car. As I loaded my bag into the back seat, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. The curtains on the host's side window were slightly parted, just enough to form a thin slit. I didn't go closer to check. I didn't want to see anything. I got into my car and started driving away without looking back. On the drive out of the neighborhood, I kept replaying everything in my head. The moved clothes, the changed lock position, the warm air, the tapping, the handle testing. It all fit together too neatly to be an accident. The host had been coming into the unit when I wasn't there. Maybe even while I was asleep. He probably expected me to be gone longer that morning when he slipped in, and when he realized I was still inside, he must have backed out quietly. That's why the air felt warm when I woke up. He had left just moments before, and the tapping in the hallway. He had probably been standing there for a long time before trying the handle. Just listening, just waiting, maybe trying to figure out if I was awake, maybe planning what he would do if the door opened. When I got far enough from the property, I finally let myself breathe in a normal way again. I pulled over at a gas station and sat in the car for several minutes, letting the tension drain from my muscles. I didn't call anyone. I didn't report anything. Nothing technically happened that I could prove. All I had were the details burned into my memory, details that made my stomach tighten every time I thought about them. But the ending is clear to me now, even if I didn't want to accept it at first. The host wasn't renting out a unit to make extra money. He was using the unit to watch people live, to learn their habits, to get inside their space without them noticing at first. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't checking for maintenance. He was checking the people staying there, studying them, getting familiar with their things, their smells, their patterns. And the way he tested the door that night, he wasn't trying to see if it was locked. He was trying to see if it would open quietly enough for him to slip inside while I slept. I left before he could figure out how to get in without waking me. And the part that still keeps me awake sometimes is the simple, terrifying thought that keeps repeating in my mind. If I hadn't put that chair under the door handle, he would have been standing inside my room before sunrise. I booked the Airbnb without thinking too much about it because I needed a cheap place for 4 nights while working a short job in another town. It wasn't a big city, just a quiet place surrounded by farms and long empty roads. The listing had only a few photos, but nothing looked strange. A small guest house behind someone's main home. White walls, a small patio, plain furniture. It looked simple and harmless. I booked it quickly because I just wanted something that wasn't a hotel. When I arrived, the sun was already low. The main house was dark, and no cars were in the driveway. The property looked empty, but the guest house keys were in a small lockbox on the door just like the host said. The air was slightly colder than I expected, and the whole place felt unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes you look over your shoulder even when you know no one is there. The guest house was small, maybe 1 bedroom and a narrow living space with a kitchenette. The first thing I noticed was how clean it looked. Almost too clean, like no one had actually stayed in it for a long time. The air smelled like disinfectant mixed with something metallic, something faint but sharp enough to make me uncomfortable. I walked around to get a feel for the place. The living room had a small couch and a coffee table. The bedroom had a single bed pushed against the wall and a wooden wardrobe that looked older than the rest of the furniture, like it didn't belong there. There was a bathroom with bright white tiles that looked recently scrubbed. Everything seemed normal at first, but the more time I spent inside, the more I felt a strange pressure on my chest, like the air was heavier than normal. It was subtle, but enough to make me keep taking deep breaths without realizing it. I unpacked a few things and sat down to rest. I wasn't tired, but I didn't want to explore anything. I didn't feel comfortable in that space, though I couldn't explain why. There were no odd noises, no weird shapes and shadows, nothing like that. It was just a gut feeling that something was off. After a while, I decided to check the windows to make sure they were all locked. It was something I always did in new places. The living room windows were locked. The bathroom window was locked too. When I checked the bedroom window, I noticed something weird. There were faint fingerprints on the glass. Not fresh, but definitely there. A few smeared marks like someone had pressed their hand there at some point. It wasn't unusual for windows to have prints, but something about them bothered me. The fingerprints were on the inside. I tried ignoring it and kept checking the place. The wardrobe in the bedroom looked out of place. The rest of the furniture was cheap and modern, but the wardrobe looked old, heavy, and worn down, like someone dragged it there from somewhere else. Its doors didn't line up properly, leaving a thin, uneven gap right between them even when closed. The inside smelled like dust and something else I couldn't identify. That night, I tried to sleep early. The bed felt stiff and the sheets were cold even after lying on them for a while. The only sound in the room was the low humming of the mini fridge in the kitchenette. I was almost asleep when I heard a soft tapping sound. Not loud, but enough to pull me back awake. One tap, then another, slow and uneven. I stayed still, waiting to hear where it came from. It sounded like it was coming from the wardrobe, but it wasn't aggressive tapping. More like something shifting inside wood or something brushing lightly against it. I stared at the wardrobe in the dark, barely able to see its outline. I kept listening. After a while, the tapping stopped. I told myself maybe the wood was old and settling. Maybe temperature changes caused it to shift. That was my explanation, and I clung to it. I eventually fell asleep, though it took longer than usual. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach tighten. The wardrobe doors were slightly wider open than before. Not by much, just enough for the gap between them to be a little bigger. I knew I hadn't touched it. I had no reason to open it after checking it the first time. I closed it again carefully, making sure both doors touched as much as they could despite the uneven frame. All day, I tried staying out of the house. I worked my job, drove around, wasted time in local stores. I didn't want to be in that place more than I needed to. When I finally returned at night, the property looked even more silent than before. No lights in the main house, no movement, just darkness around everything. Inside the guest house, the air felt colder, almost damp. As I dropped my bag by the couch, I noticed something on the kitchen counter that I didn't remember leaving there. A single empty glass. It was clean and dry, but I hadn't used it. I checked the cupboard and saw a matching set. One was missing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. My mind tried to find reasons. Maybe the host had left it out earlier. Maybe I didn't pay attention. Anything seemed better than the truth my gut was pushing toward. Later that night, around 2 a.m., the tapping came back. But this time, it wasn't small or occasional. It was more steady and deliberate. Not loud, but clear enough to know it wasn't random or caused by wood shifting. I sat up slowly, staring toward the wardrobe again. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. The tapping stopped again, and the silence after it felt even heavier than the sound itself. I moved my feet off the bed and stood up, keeping my breathing low and controlled. I didn't go near the wardrobe. My body refused to move closer. I walked to the bathroom instead, splashed water on my face, and just stood there staring at myself in the mirror. I could see the tiredness on my face. I could see the fear too. Something in that room wasn't right, and I didn't want to be anywhere near the bedroom anymore. I ended up lying on the couch in the living room, using my jacket as a pillow. I left the bedroom door open because closing it made me feel more anxious. I fell asleep eventually, with the fridge humming and the air feeling heavier than ever. When I woke up the next morning, the wardrobe doors were wide open, not slightly open, not unevenly open, fully spread apart. I hadn't been anywhere near that room. I stood at the doorway staring inside. There was nothing in the wardrobe except an old hanger and a faint dark patch on the wooden floor inside it. Not fresh but too large to ignore. It looked like something had once been stored there, something that leaked or stained over time. I grabbed my bag and stuffed everything inside without folding or organizing anything. My only goal was to get out. When I picked up the bag near the couch, I noticed something under the coffee table. A small piece of black string. It looked like it came from clothing, like it had been torn off something recently. I didn't check the windows again. I didn't check the wardrobe again. I didn't check anything. I walked straight out of the guest house, locked the door behind me, and got into my car. As I backed out of the long driveway, I saw the curtain in the guest house shift slightly. Not from wind. There was no wind. It was the motion of fabric falling back after being pulled aside. I didn't stop. I didn't go back. I didn't even message the host. I left the key in the lockbox and drove away. When I checked the listing 2 days later, the photos were gone. The description was gone. The entire listing was removed. To this day, what scares me most is not the tapping or the wardrobe doors. It's the feeling I had every time I walked into that bedroom, that I was being watched from a few feet away, from somewhere small and dark, waiting for the right moment. I'm glad I left before that moment came. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the small town I needed to visit for 2 days. It looked plain in the photos, nothing fancy. Just a small cabin-style guest house behind someone's home. The host wrote that the cabin used to be a storage shed but was remodeled for guests. And honestly, I didn't care as long as it had a bed, a shower, and a door I could lock. At the time, I didn't think about how that last part might not matter. The road leading to the property was quiet and lined with tall pine trees. When I pulled up, the sun was low and the sky looked pale, like the day was fading faster than normal. The main house was modern and well-kept, but the guest cabin in the back looked older in person than in the listing. The wood siding looked faded, parts of the trim looked recently hammered back into place, and the front step slanted a little. Still, I didn't want to overthink it. I just wanted to get inside, put my bag down, and unwind. The lockbox worked fine, and I stepped into the cabin. The inside was small, almost too small for what the photos showed. A bed shoved against the far wall, a tiny kitchenette with a microwave, a fridge the size of a suitcase, and a single window above the sink. The air inside smelled like someone cleaned fast but didn't let the space air out. A mix of old wood and some strong cleaner that still hung in the air. The floor was uneven, the walls thin enough that I felt like if I leaned on one too hard, it would bend. Still, it was fine. I told myself that. I tossed my bag on the bed, washed my hands, and sat for a bit to rest. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Even with the window shut, cabins usually have small noises. Wind rattling something, pipes groaning, the fridge humming. But this place felt like everything around me was holding its breath. And when something feels too quiet, the silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling intentional. I walked around the cabin, checking each corner even though it was just one room and a tiny bathroom. The bathroom floor felt colder than it should have been, like the ground underneath was too close to the surface. The mirror had faint scratches across the bottom edge, almost like someone dragged something sharp against it slowly. I didn't want to think about that, so I backed out and focused on settling in for the night. I heated some food I brought, ate while sitting at the small table, scrolled on my phone, and tried to relax. But every few minutes, I kept glancing at the single window above the sink. It faced the trees behind the property, and as the sun went down, the view turned into dark shapes and shadows. The glass reflected the inside of the cabin, and I didn't like the feeling that someone could be standing outside, close enough to look in, and I wouldn't know until they pressed their face to the glass. The lock on the door looked cheap, and the screws didn't seem fully tightened. I noticed that when I tried locking it for the night, clicked into place, but the knob wobbled a little. I checked it again, pressing it harder this time, trying to make sure it was secure. I didn't feel better, but I pretended I did. I turned off the overhead light and kept only the lamp on the nightstand. I lay in bed scrolling my phone until my eyes felt heavy. The cabin stayed cold even though I turned on the small heater near the kitchenette. The heater made a faint clicking sound every few seconds, like something was loose inside it. I finally put my phone down and tried to sleep. The air felt heavier at night. The type of heavy where your breathing sounds louder because nothing else around you is making noise. I pulled the blanket closer and tried to relax. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint sound. Soft, slow, almost like fabric brushing wood. I stayed still and listened harder. The sound was coming from behind the headboard. At first I thought it was an animal outside scraping against the cabin wall. But the sound was too steady, too careful. Animals scurry, scratch, move quickly. This sound moved with intention. A long, slow drag. Pause. Another drag. My chest tightened. My eyes adjusted to the dim light from the lamp I left on. The cabin looked the same, but I felt something was wrong. The air felt colder, especially on the side of the room where the headboard was. I didn't dare move. I didn't want to make noise. I stared at the wall behind my bed because that was where the sound came from. After a few seconds, the noise stopped. Not faded, stopped. I stayed awake, eyes wide open, breathing shallow. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then I heard something new. A small click beneath the floorboards. Not loud, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't part of the cabin settling. Another click came after it. Then a faint pressure shift, like someone was pushing up lightly from under the cabin. My entire body froze. I had seen the cabin's foundation when I walked around earlier in the evening. The bottom side wasn't sealed. It sat on short concrete blocks with wooden beams across, leaving a crawl space underneath. Dark, narrow, big enough for a person to move through if they really wanted to. I didn't want to picture anyone under there, but the sounds made it impossible not to. I imagined someone lying on their back under the cabin, pushing slowly on the floorboards, testing weak spots or listening for movement above. My stomach turned at the idea. I moved slowly out of the bed, trying not to make noise. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stand. I walked toward the door, each step as quiet as I could manage. The floor creaked softly under my feet, but not enough to echo. I reached for my bag on the chair and grabbed it with one hand. As I reached the door, I noticed something that made my skin crawl even more. The doormat by the entrance was slightly off-center. I remembered it being straight when I entered earlier. It wasn't something I would have moved without noticing. It was small, but in a place like that, small meant everything. Someone could have opened the door at some point, maybe while I slept lightly or when I was in the bathroom, and the mat shifted when they stepped inside or left. I didn't want to think about it any longer. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could. The click felt painfully loud in the silence. I waited for a moment, listening. Nothing, not even the wind. I stepped outside, pulling the door gently shut behind me. The yard was dark except for a weak motion light near the main house. My car was parked a short walk away, near the trees. I didn't run, but I walked fast, my eyes scanning the cabin, the trees, the area under the cabin where the crawl space hid whatever or whoever was down there. As I reached my car, I noticed something that made the whole picture come together in a terrible way. The wooden panel on the side of the cabin, the one closest to the crawl space opening, had fresh scratches along the bottom edge. Not animal scratches. Long, uneven marks like someone pried at it recently, trying to make the opening wider. Someone had been using that crawl space regularly. And from the sounds inside the cabin, they weren't just hiding under it. They were trying to come up through the floor. I got into my car, locked the doors immediately, and drove off without looking back. I didn't breathe properly until I reached a gas station miles away. I sat there trembling, thinking about how long that person had been under the cabin, whether they lived there, whether they watched guests sleep through cracks in the floorboards, whether they waited for nights when guests didn't lock the door tightly. The ending became clear in my mind as I sat shaking in the driver's seat. The cabin wasn't unsafe because it was old. It was unsafe because someone had turned the crawl space into their hiding place. Someone who came in and out through the thin wooden boards beneath the cabin. Someone who knew when the host had guests. Someone who waited for the right moment. I left before that moment came. If I had stayed until morning, I don't think I would have woken up in that bed. I think the sounds behind the wall and the clicking under the floor were the very beginning of something much worse. And the worst part is knowing the host probably knew. The cheap lock, the uneven floor, the way the cabin was positioned far from the main house. They built a perfect hiding spot without telling anyone. I never reported it. I never booked another small standalone Airbnb ever again. And now, every time I see a cabin with a crawl space underneath, I picture the floor moving in the dark, one slow push at a time. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, close to where I needed to be, and looked simple enough. It was a small studio attached to a larger house, with its own entrance at the side. The photos made it look clean, maybe a bit old, but good enough for 2 nights. I didn't think much about the location when I reserved it. I only needed a place to sleep and shower. The rest of the time I planned to be out. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the street felt. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet where it felt like nobody actually lived there. Most of the houses had closed blinds, and a few lawns looked overgrown. The place looked normal from the outside, but I remember thinking it didn't look as bright as the listing photos. The paint looked more faded, and the windows looked a little dirtier. I dragged my bag along the walkway and let myself in with the code they gave me. Inside, it smelled faintly of dust and something like old carpet. The space looked almost exactly like the photos, just older. A small kitchenette against one wall, a bed pushed near the window, a small bathroom door near the back. Everything felt narrow, like the walls were slightly closer together than they should be. I put my stuff down and walked around the room, checking everything. I always do that when I stay somewhere new. Look for anything strange just to feel more grounded. The first odd thing I noticed was the wardrobe. It was pushed up against the wall, but there was a tiny gap between the back of it and the drywall, just enough to see darkness behind it. I told myself it didn't matter. Old houses aren't perfect. Things shift. Furniture moves. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and went about unpacking a few small things. As the evening went on, I realized how thin the walls were. I could hear faint sounds from the main house behind the studio. Not voices, just movements. Footsteps maybe, or something shifting around. It wasn't constant, but every time I started to relax, something would creak again, like someone walking slowly on old wood. I tried telling myself it was normal for an older place. Later that night, after I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I kept hearing soft tapping noises from what sounded like the far corner of the room. It wasn't rhythmic. It was slow and random. Tap, then nothing for a long time, then another tap. I told myself it was probably the pipes or the house settling. I tried to sleep, but something about the sound bothered me. The taps seemed too deliberate, too gentle, like they came from something trying not to be heard. I finally fell asleep sometime after midnight. In the morning, I woke up feeling tired. I noticed my bag was slightly unzipped. I was sure I closed it all the way the night before. I thought maybe I didn't, or maybe it slid open on its own when I moved it. I tried not to overthink it. I left for the day and only came back around sunset. As soon as I walked in, I felt like the air in the studio was heavier. The smell of dust felt stronger, like the room hadn't been opened in years even though I just stayed there the night before. I checked everything again, and this time I noticed something that made my stomach drop a little. The wardrobe had been moved. Not a lot, just maybe half an inch forward, but enough that the gap behind it looked wider. I knew I didn't touch it. I knew how it looked the first time I saw it. For a moment, I wondered if someone had been inside while I was gone, but I checked the door, and the lock looked fine. There was no sign of forced entry. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it shifted on its own. Maybe the floor wasn't level. The sun went down quickly, and the room grew darker. I sat on the bed scrolling on my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move near the wardrobe. When I looked up, Nothing was there, but the air felt colder on that side of the room, like there was a draft coming from somewhere behind the furniture. I decided to check the wardrobe just to make myself feel better. I walked over slowly, even though I felt stupid for being scared. I opened the doors, and inside was empty except for a few extra hangers. But the smell inside was strange. It didn't smell like old wood or dust. It smelled like sweat. Old sweat, like someone had been closed inside there too long. The smell hit me hard, and I stepped back quickly. I sat on the bed again and tried to focus on anything else. But I couldn't stop thinking about the gap behind the wardrobe. I stared at it from across the room. I could see just a sliver of blackness, way too dark for just a wall behind it. My mind kept running through possibilities. Maybe there was a vent behind it. Maybe there was a broken panel. Maybe the house was just built strangely and there was a hollow space. Night came again, and I didn't feel like turning off the lights. The tapping sound started again, but this time they didn't come from the far corner. They came from the wall behind the wardrobe. Slow, soft, deliberate taps. I stayed completely still in bed, listening. My chest felt tight. The taps continued, sometimes closer together, sometimes far apart. Then they stopped for almost 2 minutes, and then something scraped lightly against the wall. Not loud, but long, like something dragging slowly behind the drywall. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave in the middle of the night. I was too nervous to go outside in the dark. So I stayed awake, frozen in place, until exhaustion finally took me and I drifted off around dawn. When I woke up, I noticed the wardrobe again. It had moved even more, not by a small amount this time. It looked like it had been dragged forward at least several inches. The gap behind it was now wide enough for me to see part of the wall, and I could see peeling paint, dust, and a thin vertical crack running down the drywall like something had been pressing against it from the other side. My heart started racing. I knew something was off. I didn't want to touch the wardrobe again. I grabbed my things and threw them into my bag without caring if anything got wrinkled. I didn't bother showering. I just wanted to leave. As I was packing, something on the floor near the wardrobe caught my eye. A small piece of torn fabric. Dark blue, rough texture, like denim. I didn't wear denim. I didn't bring anything like that. It hadn't been there the day before. Something inside that wall had pushed hard enough to crack the drywall. Something had shoved the wardrobe forward. Something that had left behind a piece of clothing. Something that had been in that hollow space long enough to leave a smell inside the wardrobe. My hands were shaking as I zipped my bag. I kept my eyes away from the wardrobe the whole time. I didn't want to see anything move. I didn't want to hear anything from the wall. I just wanted out. I left the studio, locked the door as fast as I could, and walked to my car. The entire time, my back felt exposed, like someone was watching me from a window or crack somewhere behind me. I didn't look back. I got into the car and drove away without stopping. When I finally parked somewhere safe, I sat in my car for a long time trying to steady my breathing. I reported the stay to Airbnb, but I didn't mention everything. I just said the place felt unsafe and I didn't want to stay there another night. I didn't tell them about the tapping, the scraping, the smell, the denim piece, or how the wardrobe kept moving. I didn't want to sound insane. A few days later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone, removed completely. No explanation, no reviews, no trace. I still think about that hollow space behind the wardrobe. The tapping, the scraping, the smell of someone who had been hiding too long in the dark. I don't know if someone was living inside the walls or if someone used that space to get into the studio when guests slept. I don't know how long they had been there or how many people before me had ignored the signs. But I'm sure of one thing. If I had stayed one more night, that crack in the wall would have opened wider. And I don't think I would have woken up to the same room again.